What's going on, my fellow rock and rollers? Don't forget to hit the bell notification icon to be notified every time I put out a new video on my channel. The Verve's first two albums were not very commercially successful, but the group's third record, 1997's Urban Hymns, was a massive hit, thanks in large part to the single Bittersweet Symphony. With the release of Urban Hymns, the Verve knocked Oasis out of the #1 spot on the album charts in the UK, and Urban Hymns would spend a total of 12 weeks at the #1 spot, and spent a total of 124 weeks on the charts. The Verve's Urban Hymns would outsell Radiohead, Blur, and Oasis, who all released albums in 1997. Released as the lead single from the album, Bittersweet Symphony wasn't just the biggest song of the band's career, but one of the biggest songs of the decade. It was nominated for a Grammy, while publications including Enemy and Rolling Stone named the song the single of the year. Considering Bittersweet Symphony was such a massive single, being a top 5 hit in the UK and a top 20 hit in the US, and was licensed heavily by advertisers, it should have made the Verve a lot of money, but it didn't. In fact, the song became a nightmare for the band. So you're probably wondering, what happened? Stay tuned to find out. Bittersweet Symphony would find itself as the opening track off the band's third album. The grandiose nature of the song makes it feel larger than life, thanks in large part to the string arrangement. It may be shocking to learn that the Verve frontman Richard Ashcroft almost threw the song away, but it was producer Youth, who also happens to be the bassist in the post-punk band Killing Joke, who pushed to have the song included on the record. The song's trademark orchestral arrangement was placed by Youth, who would tell an interviewer, "This was certainly the most successful track I've done. I think Richard had actually cut a version with John Leckie, but by the time I came on board, he didn't want to do the song. I persuaded him to have a go at cutting a version, but at first he really wasn't into it. It was only once we put strings on it that he started getting excited. Then, towards the end, Richard wanted to chuck all the album away and start again. What was my reaction? Horror. Sheer horror. All I could say was, I really think you should reconsider." While the string arrangement gave the song its signature sound, it would soon become a legal nightmare for the band. It turned out the orchestral arrangement for Bittersweet Symphony was sampled from the Andrew Oldham Orchestra. Andrew Oldham, for his part, used to be the Rolling Stones manager, and in reality, there was no Andrew Oldham Orchestra. It was just a name used for recordings made by Oldham, who used a number of session musicians, including the members of the Rolling Stones. Back in the 60s, it was commonplace for orchestras to cover famous pop and rock songs, and that was true for both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones music. The sample the Verve used was actually a cover of the Rolling Stones song The Last Time, which was penned by members Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. While the Verve had permission to sample the Andrew Oldham Orchestra's recording, they didn't have permission from the Rolling Stones, which the orchestral track was based on. Now it's important to note that the orchestral arrangement is not on the Rolling Stones version of the song, and that's where things got a little tricky. The copyright to the Rolling Stones song was owned by a company named ABKCO, which was run by a controversial businessman named Alan Klein, who was a ruthless negotiator. Klein would be involved with both the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and while he would save the Beatles from the brink of bankruptcy, his involvement with the group in the late 60s appeared to be a catalyst for the band breaking up. And the Rolling Stones would accuse Klein of withholding royalty payments, stealing their publishing, and accused him of not paying their taxes for almost half a decade. And Klein would end up holding the copyrights to all of the Rolling Stones songs prior to 1971. And prior to the Verve releasing Bittersweet Symphony, the band did successfully negotiate a deal to use a 6-note sample from the Andrew Oldham orchestral recording of The Last Time with its copyright holder Decca Records. But the band didn't get permission from the Rolling Stones for their song The Last Time. By the time the Verve's label, EMI and Virgin, realized their mistake and tried to get a licensing agreement from Klein, huge quantities of Urban Hymns CDs had already been manufactured, and Bittersweet Symphony was already released as a single. The Verve's manager Jazz Summers would end up calling ABKCO and speaking with Klein, who flat out said no to giving a licensing agreement as Klein didn't believe in the idea of sampling. And in a last-ditch effort, the head of the Verve's label, Virgin Records, flew out to New York to meet with Klein in person and played him the song. Klein knew the band and the label were in a bind and agreed to license The Last Time under the condition that there was a 50-50 split for the song's royalties. As Bittersweet Symphony started to pick up steam and move higher up the charts, Klein would change his position and claim that the Verve sampled too much of The Last Time and sued the band for plagiarism. The case would end up being settled out of court, as the Verve didn't want to spend thousands of dollars in a prolonged legal battle. The settlement would include Mick Jagger and Keith Richards being listed as co-writers on the track along with Ashcroft, and the band had to hand over 100% of their royalties to the pair as well. And by 2018, Ashcroft only made $1,000 off the song, which was paid to him as part of the settlement deal. Billboard.com would estimate that the song to date has made about $5 million in its lifetime due to radio airplay and licensing deals. If this whole debacle with the Rolling Stones hadn't happened, Ashcroft would have likely made at least half of the $5 million. The Verve frontman would later quip that it was the best song Jagger and Richards have written in 20 years. And to make matters worse, the Verve had no control over how the song was to be used, so if companies wanted to license the track, the Verve couldn't say yes or no. That was the case when Nike asked to use the song and the band said no, so Nike went to Alan Klein and licensed the song. It would be ironic that after all the legal dust had settled, Bittersweet Symphony would become one of ABKCO's most lucrative songs. But the legal problems didn't end there for the Verve, as Andrew Oldham would end up suing the group for $1.7 million over unpaid royalties. But perhaps the saddest part of this whole story was that Andrew Oldham never composed the original orchestral arrangement. It was a composer named David Whittaker who received no compensation for his work being sampled by the Verve. What makes this legal dispute even more complicated is that the Rolling Stones song The Last Time was actually inspired by another song, a 1958 track called This May Be the Last Time by the Staple Singers. With guitarist Keith Richards acknowledging the similarities, telling an interviewer in 2003, "We came up with The Last Time, which was basically a readapting of a traditional gospel song that had been sung by the Staple Singers, but luckily the song itself goes back into the mists of time," he'd say. Now, of course, the Staple Singers didn't get any compensation for Bittersweet Symphony either. And you're maybe wondering, did the Rolling Stones ever comment on the lawsuits and settlement? Well, yes, they did. In 1999, Keith Richards was asked by Q Magazine about whether the settlement was fair, and he said the following: "I'm out of whack here. This is serious lawyer shit. If the Verve can write a better song, they can keep the money." Now, I'm glad to say that there was a happy ending to this whole story, as on May 23, 2019, Richard Ashcroft announced, and I quote, "As of last month, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards signed over all of their publishing for Bittersweet Symphony, which was a truly kind and magnanimous thing for them to do. I never had a personal beef with the Stones. They've always been the greatest rock and roll band in the world. It's been a fantastic development. It's life-affirming in a way," he'd say. But you're maybe wondering, why did the Rolling Stones all of a sudden have a change of heart? Well, it started in 2018. Ashcroft was done with the Verve after their last breakup in 2009 and was now a solo artist. He had taken on new management and had new managers by the name of Steve Kuttner and John Kennedy, who knew their first job would be to settle the long-standing dispute over Bittersweet Symphony. Kennedy famously got another British band, the Stone Roses, out of their terrible recording contract with Silvertone Records back in the 90s. And according to Kennedy, who spoke to Stereogum, he would claim that the out-of-court settlement the band reached with Klein back in the 90s was, and I quote, "one of the toughest deals in music history." The management team had a difficult task ahead of them, as a lot of Ashcroft's previous managers had tried to work out a deal to hand over the song to the frontman, but failed. According to Kennedy, there was no legal options Ashcroft could take to get the song back, because the settlement the band signed with Klein was, and I quote, "watertight." The only way they could get the song back was to negotiate a deal, which was what they tried. In 2009, Klein passed away and his son Jody Klein would take over ABKCO. The first cold calls Ashcroft's managers made to Jody went unanswered, but they eventually ended up speaking, and Jody suggested the pair speak to the Rolling Stones manager to escalate the matter. A lunch meeting would be arranged with the Stones manager, Joyce Smith, who met with Kennedy to discuss Ashcroft's frustrations over the song. Smith would agree to talk to her clients, and they actually agreed to relinquish control over the song, including songwriting credits and royalties. In addition to that, Jagger and Richards requested that ABKCO pay Ashcroft extra for all his troubles over the years. The announcement of the song returning to Ashcroft was made at the Ivor Novello Awards in London on May 23rd, where Ashcroft was honored for his contribution to British music. Ironically, in 2018, Ashcroft would end up supporting the Stones on several dates of their tour. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe. If you guys have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comment section below. Take care.